Hi everybody, welcome back to the Word from the Shed, and this time I just want to spend a little time thinking about a discussion that I saw between Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who's the Chief Rabbi of England, and John Anderson, who's an ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. And they were talking about Western culture today, and they were talking about a new orthodoxy, is what I've called it, and they call it the culture of offence. What I mean by that is the sacrifice of truth and free speech for the supreme value, the new supreme value of not causing offence. Many university courses now are actually structured around this whole idea of not causing offence, rather than being structured around open, honest debate, search for truth, and within that, tolerance of other people's views. Universities now have safe spaces where you can go and not be challenged with anything. There is banned speech in our land, not only the universities. There's a deplatforming of those who question the new orthodoxy. In the midst of this, truth is being lost. We're becoming a narcissistic people. And the paradox of the new orthodoxy, the culture of offence, is that the first people to take offence when they're disagreed with by traditionalists is to get very angry. They become the offended ones because we're not holding to their orthodoxy. And we have a culture now where shame and blame is really on the increase, much of it media driven. They always have to find someone to blame or something to blame for almost every news article they produce. Now, just to hop slightly and talk about the moment when the Americans came into the war, December 1941, was when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and destroyed much of the American Pacific Fleet. Really hostile act. And the US government had one question. They were going to war with these people, but we don't understand them. How do they think? What is their culture? And so they asked an anthropologist by the name of Ruth Benedict to help them find an answer. She'd written a book, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. And there she says that there are two different cultures clashing. The one is a shame culture and the other is a guilt culture. Now, the shame culture she described as being typical of the Japanese at that time, not saying now. And the shame culture was built around a characteristic of honour. But honour, really, you could translate that for saving face. It wasn't the honour that we know in the West. It was if you get it wrong, there's no way out. And you have to be shamed and bring all sorts of stuff on you. And in that culture, there's no room for forgiveness. And so the only way out of shame is suicide. And we know that they had kamikaze pilots in the war, and we all know about Harry Carey and stuff like that, which went on rather than surrender. Tragic. Now, the Western culture is built around guilt culture, which sounds terribly negative, but actually it isn't. Because the characteristic that that's built upon is the need to be righteous. Now, when I say righteous, I'm not saying pious, I'm saying being right with God, having a clear conscience before God, which gives you a clear conscience with yourself and your neighbour. And that comes through the offer of forgiveness, because we're all fallen, we all get things wrong. And forgiveness is what gives us a new beginning. So it doesn't, when we're forgiven or when we forgive, it doesn't end in suicide. It begins, if you like, in new life. restoration. So that's a fundamental difference between these two cultures that went to war. Now, Western culture has been built on the latter, on the guilt culture with the forgiveness and the new life. And that's largely being lost now. Forgiveness seems to be going out of the window, civility and tolerance. And we've become one of the worst blame and shame cultures in the world, I think, driven much by our media and supported by our universities. So I just for a moment want to go back to the source. And the source, of course, is in the Judeo-Christian teachings of forgiveness. And before that, before Christ came and offered forgiveness to the whole world, not just one people, revenge held sway. Let's look at the woman caught in adultery. I'll read it quickly to you. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered round him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to try and accuse him. But Jesus bent down and started to write in the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard him began to go away one at a time, the older first, until only Jesus was left with the woman. And standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they that accuse you? Who has condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Neither do I condemn you," said Jesus. "Go and sin no more." It's a very beautiful story. The leaders of the Jewish people brought this woman to shame her, to accuse her, to see her die for committing adultery. Jesus' response, writing on the ground, "What about that money you stole a little time ago? You took it out of the collection, you there, Mr. Pharisee. What about that untruth you told over there? What about those nasty thoughts you carry in your mind over there?" He said, "If any of you is without sin, you cast the first stone." Well, they just peeled off. They couldn't deal with that. And just Jesus and the woman were left. Now in a suicide culture, in a blame culture, shame culture, she would have killed herself. She was completely shamed. It was a terrible thing to commit adultery. But Jesus gave her hope for the future. In everything he did, he said, "You're loved, you're forgiven. Don't do it again." That's the difference. That's where our culture came. And now that these things are being forgotten, not taught in schools, not taught in many churches, sadly, our culture is beginning to suffer. Forgiveness tells us two things. I finish with this. We need not be held captive by the past. We are loved and respected as human beings made in the image of God. God bless you. Thank you once again for listening, and we'll see you next Sunday. Bye for now.